Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmakeru_u. Each week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by music supervisor Jennifer Smith, whose work includes Why Women Kill, Behind the Music, and The Transcendence, just to name a few. Welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So I guess my first question for you is, because I haven't worked much with music supervisors, can you sort of give us a background of, what it is you do and your involvement with film and television?
Of course. Thank you for asking. A lot of people, they don't actually know what we do. We just have this like glittery title you see online. We're a very important craft to any project, whether it's film, television, video games, advertising, all of that. Think of us as the department head. So I define my job as a sonic storyteller. So working with the writers or the producers, the directors, the network, all those different things, and coming up with what is the music we're going to talk about? What's the tone? Working with the composer. A lot of people don't realize music supervisors also work with the composer. It's not just, we have a composer, we don't need a music supervisor. We're very instrumental in also working with the composer and kind of being the translator between. For example, Gordon, if you said, this score, I want it to be more red. I know what red means, and I can translate it to the composer as well as let them do their creativity with all those things. We also, not only are we well versed in music, whether it's songs, original score writing, we also handle the business end. Fun fact, I like to say the number one reason films don't get distribution is because of music. It's a very important thing. So we're sonic storytellers. We handle the business side, meaning, the clearance is like, for example, if you're like, hey, I really want this Taylor Swift song, I can look at it and say, Taylor's very particular, you need permission for everything. And I can say, well, why do we like Taylor Swift? What about this song? And kind of be a translator and find other things that fit that will work within our budget, within our time frame. We could find something ahead of time. For example, I got a cover done of a very iconic song, and I knew that I had to get ahead of that because the songwriters would have to approve of it. And I knew kind of what they were looking for between the film as well as what our budget was and what the songwriters would approve. So we're really instrumental on making the story come to life, not just with, not just the business, but we're instrumental for the creative, but we are not lawyers. A lot of people don't realize we are not lawyers. Production attorneys, they should be able to handle your music lawyer things. That's not our job. We are sonic storytellers, and we also know the business side. We're one of the few departments that can work between film, TV, advertising, video games, trailers, as well as the music industry. We kind of go in between. And because of our relationships with the music industry is the difference between something working out for a film and not. For example, if I called Universal, it would be a very different conversation if you called Universal. Just like in entertainment, it's all about the team and who you know and people's reputation.
I got into sound designing at a point when things were just developing. I was really fascinated by the idea that dialogue, effects, music were all components of the soundtrack to a film, which had never occurred to me before. What gets me excited is coming up with sound ideas that do match picture, but also is not just the equivalent of what you're seeing on screen. I'm Eugene Garrity, and this is my course on sound design.
I noticed you have lots of records behind you.
Yes, I,
So,
I am I'm a huge music fan.
yeah, well, yeah, you'd have to be, I think, for the role. So, like, when you get scripts, you're going through and like figuring out what music can fit, or if they've got a song that they've written into the script, how to get the license and what have you. But like, when you're looking at scripts, is there a lot of times where they're wanting you to, we don't have a massive budget, but can you come up with something that
Oh,
we can get, and you have to
obviously.
find like indie bands and stuff, or
Yeah, our relationships aren't just for publishers and labels. It's indie bands, it's managers, it's agents, it's songwriters, it's producers. My favorite part of the job is actually the research, right? So if we have a script that takes place in the 20s, I will do a lot of extensive research about music in the 20s, because music in the 20s was very different in Mississippi than New York, than LA, than Texas. And it's really important that you do the research with that. Also, as you can see, I'm a giant music nerd. I was that strange kid that would read liner notes and then go on these little paths to figure out, like, well, who wrote that? That's interesting. What else do they do? And I still do that. So whenever I read a script, I hear sounds and music when I read something. And I'll write down character sounds that I hear. Maybe it's a backstory between the story. If a song is written in, usually when a writer writes in a song, it's for a reason. So it's really wrapping my head about, why is it that song? What's important about that song? What is it doing for the story? And also, when we're filming, there's a lot of music things that have to be handled before you start filming that people don't realize. That's why it's important to bring a music supervisor on in pre-production, because we can look at something and say, that's a music need, that's going to cost a lot of money. I need a lot of time to figure this out. Whether you're dealing with choreographers, you also work with all the different department heads, from costumes to props to casting to all these different things that people don't realize involve a music supervisor. I work a lot with actors as well, because if, for example, a character needs to sing and the actor that you hired, to tell your story, they may think they can sing, but there's a lot of layers that go through it. So I'm here to empower them and to give them backup, to help them and say, I can help you with different things, or we could bring in a vocal coach to give you a little bit more confidence. There's a lot of things that need to happen before we film. And those things actually save money in the long end. It's not fix it in post, fix it in post. So when I read a script, it's so many layers of music and sound that I break down, and I call myself a music detective, a therapist, because when you're talking to a director about a setup, or we want to talk to an actor about their singing, there's so many things that go into it, as well as, let's talk about the town that you wrote and this person. What was the back history? From me reading it, I'm sensing these things. Oh, I didn't think about it that way. Okay, in the script, a son and a father, they're going through, teenager angst where they're doing this. And it turns out by the end, they have more in common. Well, based on the script, the father grew up in New Jersey in the 80s. He's like Bon Jovi, a muscle car. And obviously his son is kind of counter that. But what brings them together at the end might be, there are more similarities involved. So maybe we put sonic Easter eggs of similar guitar riffs that Bon Jovi used that's in modern bands, to kind of put those pepper in, to kind of bring it together at the end. I'm really big on sonic Easter eggs when it comes to storytelling.
You must make the best mixtapes.
Been doing it since I was a kid. Running and hitting on the radio, like was it record,
Yeah.
DJ talking or something, or just going through records. I would always listen to records. And my favorite thing still is, when I travel, I go through any local record store and I look at local music and I listen. And that's my souvenir, is I buy a record on my trip from a local record store. Sometimes I don't even know what it is. It's discovery. It's fun.
Well, and it's so interesting, because you mentioned it, doing research, let's say in the 20s, and you have, this
Mhm.
town's completely different. We're so connected now that it almost feels like, um, like I think about Seattle in the 90s and coming up with
Mhm.
grunge. And it's because it's this pocket that no one really toured to, no one really cared about, and they
Yeah.
just created their own stuff. But nowadays it feels like we don't get that as much, because everything's connected. So is there, like, do you still find that sometimes, like little pockets of areas that you might not be as crazy big as Seattle, or New Orleans in the 20s, but has its own sound?
Yeah. Yeah. You just really have to, you do a lot of reading. I look at kind of music, what bands toured in. There's a lot of historical documents about different performers that went there. You can find the music. Sometimes you can find little documentaries that talk about it. And maybe it was a certain type of guitar in that region that was popular with, say, a bar band, right? Then I can go in and be, okay, with this guitar, where can we find someone that was a songwriter? What type of music was popular around that area? Okay, back then the radio stations were only in this area. What did they play? So you can go find old radio things to kind of figure out, to give it the texture that it needs because maybe they weren't listening to something that everyone's like, oh, that's a huge hit in the 20s. Well, it hadn't hit the airwaves back then yet due to technology. And you're right, we do take that for as, and we just go, oh yeah, everything's accessible. Well, that's not true. It's also not true in the world because we see a lot of interesting music coming over from other countries, whether it's guitars, lyric structure, vocals, that are starting to infiltrate, top radio in the UK as well as the US, that might be coming from different countries. A lot of really great music producers are coming over from China, and they have a different type of vibe, modern, that might have been, say, even in the 90s or the 2000s. People put 2000s as now. Every era has its own music, and a lot of people don't realize this, but when you're using music to tell a story, you can't say sounds like the 80s. Well, the 80s, it's not just sounds like, it's not like The Weekend. The way production was done also takes you back. Music production, it's not just, is it modern music that sounds like? Do you want it to be sounds like in the sense of having those vibes, making it modern, or do you want it to sound a little bit more authentic within our story to take us in, our audience to take us into the story, to be part of this journey, to be really engrossed? Or do you want us to just do music that, will say, okay, sounds like the 80s, like The Weekend? Or do we want authentic stuff? And there's a lot of really great modern bands that will use production from those eras, and it takes us more into the story than something that's more modern that just use synths. So you really kind of have to deep down and dig in. And also, music has to bend a picture. If it's 2 frames off and it doesn't bend, or sometimes you listen to a great song, and you're like, this is great. And then you throw it against the picture and you're like, oh, that changes the story, the performance, the intention. You really have to pay attention to those little nuances, because we are telling a story through music. But at the end of the day, the words are important, the performance is important. We really have to be together. Music bends to picture, picture doesn't bend to music.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now.
Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
Like, I think about the 80s, and whenever I hear, someone who hasn't put in the thought to what to play, it's always, like you said, it's sort of the synthy music. But there were so many styles happening at the same time. Like, you had the ska stuff, you had the synthy stuff, you had, Boy George, you had it's all like a melting pot. The 70s are leading into it with, Bruce Springsteen. So it's interesting to try even to pinpoint like an era. Like, yeah, we have like the stereotype, I guess you could say, of what that
Exactly.
sounds like, but then there's the authentic actual sound of it. Is there a particular, like, was there a particular song that you were like, it was really hard to get for the rights signed off on, but you were so happy about getting it for a particular show or movie?
We all have the white whale.
Yeah.
I conquered my white whale recently on a project that will hopefully be airing this year or next. I'm not quite sure, how air dates work. It's all based to the distributor. I do have my white whale that I will post once it is out, because it's a song that is not licensed as often as people think.
Okay, interesting. Now, when you've sort of mentioned it a bit, you talked about being a sonic storyteller. I wonder if you could take us through that a bit more. Like, what do you like to do as a storyteller in terms of characters and in terms of arcs?
Of course, I come from a theater background, which is what I think makes me a little bit more different than a lot of music supervisors. Yes, I can make a mixtape. Yes, I can listen to music. Yes, but because of my theater background, it really helps me hone into characters and story and music and the intention. Just like in theater, you have a finite set of time, and let's be honest, it's not the special effects, the budget, all those things. And you really have to connect with an audience and make someone either love a character, hate a character, get engrossed in an environment, learn something really quickly. In theater, it's very, very quick, right? So the way when I read a script is I think of that as kind of like a dance and a character and a story. Are we just sitting in a room having a what is that room? How does that room feel? What is the intention of the room? Sometimes you sit in a room and it's silent, but is it actually silent? Is there a little bit of music bleeding from the kitchen because mom is cooking? What type of music would she listen to? That sets the ambiance up, right? Before we walk into things. Is the music that mom listens to, is it from her childhood? Is it current? Is it maybe her happy mix because she's going through something and this character who's, a teenager knows when mom listens to this mix or this record or whatever it is, what it actually means. So it's setting up the performer knows mom's listening to Peggy Lee, and you maybe the performer knows that and it's like tension and you're automatically creating a character and a mood. So I think of it from my theater background. That's kind of how I bring things in about how music adds. And a lot of filmmakers, they want to do wall-to-wall music. Well, music should add to something. It shouldn't just be wall-to-wall to plaster something. Because if there's music wall-to-wall in a TV show or a film or all those things, it takes away the intention of what the music's for. And as an audience member, we actually don't pay attention to the story as much. Sometimes too much music is not good, and sometimes there's beauty in silence. And then, the sound designer might come in if the birds are chirping or the creaking of the wood or whatever those things are. Um, that's like a huge thing as well. So I come from it from a theater background where that's why I ask all these questions when I'm working on projects. Even in documentaries, I ask 1,000 questions. Who is this person? I notice that the way they talk is this, this, and this. Is it because they're nervous? Is it because that's who they are? All these questions add me because whether it's documentary, it's narrative, it's reality, it's an ad, it's all character, right? So I come from it from a theater background, just like when you're doing a deep dive in theater, talking about these different things, because you have a lot of things that you have to convey in not as much time as you think. And just like in film, even though TV shows are, hour long, it's like every episode's a mini film, I still approach it as from a theater perspective. What is the story? What's the movement? Is the music creating movement? Is it stopping time? All these different things. And when you work with a composer, it's again coming up with those different things. And a lot of people don't realize this, but the music supervisor is very big in temping music. We work very closely with the editors, with the music editor, with all these different departments, because we are an important part of the team.
Well, and if the director gets temp love or the producer gets temp love, you've got to wean them off it if you can't afford
Well,
that bill.
also when you're part of those conversations, because you know ahead of time, okay, this writer or maybe this thing is going to take more time, you can help them get with the temp love, meaning I know this is going to be a situation like, for example, if I'm working on an indie film and we don't have the budget for an orchestra, we're going to temp the film in realism, right? Because, well, it doesn't sound like the temp. Well, that's like an 80-piece orchestra that you tempt it with. We don't have that budget. You can still create the same story, same vibe, same art without the 80-piece orchestra. But it's about understanding those little nuances about what is the music going to do? What does it need to do? Maybe we can put a rough in there as a nice roadblock, and then we know a composer that can come in and really zhuzh it up the way that we want, or create something that is authentic to the story. For temp love for music, just throwing in music, you're like, this song is cool. That's why we come in to help with that, because you don't want it to be temp love. Because it's like, great, I love this Beyonce song, let's just throw it in. All you editors out there just throwing music in, you are creating you are creating a problem. So please talk to your music people. I know editors are also creative visionaries on the visual route, but when it comes to music, you should really be collaborating with your music supervisor.
Now, I have one last question for you.
Of course.
What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Ooh, that's always a hard one. I just started watching this new show recently. I guess it's kind of guilty pleasure. It's called Sisters Five Eva.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a great one.
And I love it. It's comedy, it's music, it's very I think it's geared towards my generation of growing up on the MTV and the
Yeah.
YM magazines and all those different things where you had
Like,
posters on your wall and everything.
yeah.
It's pretty awesome. I'm not
And
gonna
the
lie.
boy bands and the
The boy band era, the
girl
girl band
bands.
era, the lyrics that when you're 13 and you're singing and you're like, that is really inappropriate now. What is wrong with me?
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Thank you. It was so great to meet you.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com or, of course, on Instagram at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.